Take a look at some of the pictures that may also help tell the story of exactly what kind of relationship the U.S. president has with the other members of the G7. Here's a picture taken by the U.S. This was tweeted out by White House aide Dan Scavino. You can see Trump there seated, all the world leaders huddled around him. Well, here's how Germany framed the exact same moment. This was tweeted by Chancellor Angela Merkel's press secretary, and in this one you can see Merkel leaning across the table. Here's how Canada spun it. Again, the same moment, different angle, different country. In this one, it's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, not Trump, who looks like he's overseeing discussions. Let's bring back our panel. I want to get your take, Ron Brownstein, on what you see when you look at those pictures.
I'm going with Merkel. I think that is the more accurate reflection of kind of where we are in the world right now, where, there was a report this week that Germany, the German government for the first time feels that it has to develop a kind of a strategy for dealing with a fundamentally hostile U.S. One thing that happened around the edges of this was the president celebrating the new Italian government, which is a populist, nativist, right-wing, anti-migrant government. You've had the new German ambassador from the Trump administration talking about promoting kind of populist, nativist parties across Europe. I mean, this is an inflection point, and it is likely to get worse before it gets better. I mean, if you go down the list, as we said, you start with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Paris Climate Accord, the Iran Agreement, NAFTA after this weekend. The idea of a swift renegotiation of the North American Free Trade Agreement seems pretty unlikely, and you do wonder what is the breaking point for congressional Republicans. I mean, they have generally, as we've talked about over these 18 months, become more deferential to the president. But one area where you're seeing more probably geysers of discontent than any other is trade, because so many key constituencies in the Republican coalition are uneasy with the prospect of trade wars, not only kind of the Chamber of Commerce, but also the farmer and the rural interests that are the absolute backstop, the firewall for Republicans in the midterm election. So whether that gets more intense, Bob Corker is trying to overturn some of this. Mitch McConnell says, no, we don't want to challenge the president. Can they hold that line? I don't know.
Can it be the U.S. against the world, Michelle?
I mean, how to answer that? It's a place that generally a nation would not want to be, especially when there are so many crises either in effect or looming. You need cooperation on a lot of things, and the U.S. has found this in the past. The U.S. needed a lot of cooperation to get the Iran nuclear deal. Remember? Obama needed that. He needed a lot of cooperation to fight ISIS, which is now becoming a success. The U.S. will need continued cooperation on that. The U.S. needed cooperation and continues to need cooperation in putting pressure on North Korea. That's another particularly difficult one. The U.S. will need cooperation in fighting the influence of China and the aggressive tendencies of Russia. But in this case, even today, we saw Trump seemingly carrying water for Vladimir Putin. So I feel like, we all know Trump's strategy to break down the old sort of structures of how things are done, to think outside the box and do things that are daring and bold and America first. And there's a possibility that he'll get some successes on that. I mean, maybe he's about to get the big success, which will be ultimately denuclearizing North Korea. We just don't know what the outcome is. But when you look at the economy and in the near term, getting into these potential trade wars with close U.S. allies and alienating them when you might well need their cooperation down the road, and to get a good deal yourself, you're likely going to need cooperation on that. That's why there's a lot of worry, and that's why you are getting pushback from Republicans and from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and groups that are seriously worried that, even though he's trying things out and he's talking big and he's putting threats out there that might not all come true, there's still a real risk of having it come back and bite you, maybe in ways you don't necessarily expect.
Kimberly, quickly, if you will, I just think about the U.S. credibility going into this negotiation in Singapore with the leader of North Korea. And in one day, the president says the relationships are fantastic after he had been on the attack on Twitter before going to the summit. And then he's back on the attack, throwing insults out to American allies. Does American and the president's credibility and the ability to trust he says he's going to do what he says he's going to do matter in this going into the North Korean negotiation?
Well, for the North Korean negotiations to succeed, he's going to need other nations at the other end of that to help back up whatever he's able to secure. He's going to need other nations for increasing sanctions on a number of bad actors, including Iran. And what he's unfortunately encouraging in the international order is for other relationships to form between European nations, between other Western nations, and also even some nations reaching out to China and even Russia as alternates to the United States. Those new relationships may well remain even when the U.S. gets friendlier.